Amélie Dubois stepped into the Chateau de Valois ballroom like a whisper in a storm. The air buzzed with veiled judgment, laughter sharper than crystal flutes. Women glittered like constellations fallen to earth, their jewels rivaling the chandeliers above. But Amélie, dressed in a sleek black silk gown devoid of embellishments, drew attention for all the wrong reasons. To them, simplicity read as deficiency by the grand tapestry. Three women observed her like a curiosity. She says she was invited, one murmured. Technically, so were we all, another replied. Amused point one approached Amélie, eyes skimming her dress. The service entrance is that way, ma belle. I'm not working tonight. Amélie replied smoothly. A ripple of laughter followed. She's looking, they whispered, then silence. Jean-Luc de Montaigne, tech mogul and enigma, took the stage, his presence silencing the room like snowfall. He handed the host a white envelope, then turned toward the crowd. Before we begin, he said, allow me to introduce Mademoiselle Amélie Dubois, my future wife. The laughter died mid-breath. Earlier, Amélie had arrived quietly. No cameras, no entourage. Her presence was deliberate, her black gown fluid in the evening breeze. A diamond riviere graced her neck. No clutch, no fanfare. At registration, the woman at the desk blinked. Table 1, she said, disbelief curling at the edges of her voice. Inside, well-strutted in polished shoes and perfumed silks, Amélie moved with calm assurance, her stillness mistaken for invisibility. Guests handed her coats, mistaking her for staff. One woman asked about catering. Amélie simply smiled, the kind of smile that unsettles those accustomed to being right. When she took her seat at table 1, unease rippled like a chill through velvet. A countess with sapphire earrings gave a polite but strained smile. A touch, understated, she noted, her voice laced with condescension. Thank you, Amélie replied, unfazed. Moments later, a young woman arrived, puzzled. I think you're in the wrong seat. I'm in seat 3, Amélie said. Oh, the woman said, reading the place card. You just don't quite fit in here. It wasn't the first jab, nor would it be the last. Another woman leaned in during the appetizer. Are you assisting with the event? No. Public relations, then? Amélie didn't respond. Some questions are commands in disguise. By dessert, the scrutiny had intensified. A woman snapped a photo of her discreetly, as if to catalog the anomaly. They weren't curious about who Amélie was. They were desperate to define her, to place her. Then the host returned. Ladies and gentlemen, we begin the bidding for tonight's centerpiece, an heirloom sapphire necklace, valued at over 3 million euros. The room stirred as the piece gleamed under glass. The countess beside Amélie leaned over. Well, it certainly wouldn't suit your ensemble. That was the moment. Not the laughter, not the insults, but the certainty that Amélie didn't belong, couldn't belong. The necklace, a symbol of legacy and exclusion, glittered like a dare. The bidding began. 100,000 euros, 250,000 euros, 500,000 euros. Hands raised with ease, each gesture a silent affirmation of power. But the room's eyes weren't on the necklace. They were on Amélie, waiting to see if she'd flinch, falter, disappear. A woman whispered, these pieces are rarely worn. They're not really for people like us. The fur hit like a blade wrapped in silk. Still, Amélie didn't move. She didn't need to. Her very presence, serene, composed, undeniable, was the disruption. The gala had paraded its heritage, its exclusivity, and its subtle cruelty. But Amélie had brought something else, quiet defiance. She hadn't come to bid. She had come to be seen. Then, a voice cut through the escalating bids, a voice Amélie hadn't heard all evening. 3 million euros. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. Every head in the ballroom turned. The host blinked, momentarily speechless. 3 million euros, Jean-Luc confirmed, stepping into the light from the side of the stage. Tall, composed, his impeccably tailored suit a silent statement of power. Yes, he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And I am not bidding. A collective gasp swept through the room, a rustle of silk and disbelief. But that's not how this works, the host stammered. Jean-Luc offered a faint smile. It is now. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, producing a slim black envelope, and handed it to the stunned host. A wire transfer has already been initiated, along with a separate endowment to the Valois Foundation for the necklace's continued preservation. The host stared at the envelope, speechless. Jean-Luc turned from the stage, his gaze meeting Amelie's across the hushed ballroom. He walked towards her, each step deliberate, every eye following his movement. The silence in the room was now absolute, almost reverent. He stopped before her chair, producing a small velvet box from his pocket, a box Amelie hadn't seen before. Inside, nestled against the dark velvet, the sapphire Riviere gleamed. Unwanted by them, already hers. He didn't utter the expected words of proposal. He didn't need to. Amelie rose. Jean-Luc gently lifted the necklace and fastened it around her neck. Then, he leaned close and whispered. They mocked a woman who already possessed the true jewel. The Riviere settled against her skin, not as a trophy, but as a quiet affirmation. Jean-Luc stood beside her, his hand finding hers, his gaze unwavering on the host. The silence in the room had shifted, no longer just surprise, but something akin to apprehension. The air crackled with the dawning realization that they had profoundly misjudged. The host finally found his voice. "Monsieur de Montaigne," he stammered, "we were unaware of your attendance this evening." Jean-Luc's smile was subtle. Clearly, a sharp intake of breath could be heard from the back of the room. The name was beginning to resonate. Jean-Luc de Montaigne, the reclusive billionaire, the principal benefactor of the Valois Foundation, whose anonymous contributions over the past decade dwarfed all other donations combined. He wasn't merely a guest. He was the very foundation upon which their opulent world rested. And Amelie wasn't just his companion. She was the future patron whose name would grace their endowments. The woman near the stage dropped her champagne flute, the sound sharp in the sudden quiet. No one laughed. No one whispered. They simply watched, their eyes wide, their carefully constructed pride shrinking beneath their designer attire. This was no longer a tale of romance. It was a stark display of power, and they were not part of it. Jean-Luc reached into his jacket once more, producing a second envelope. "I have also decided to match the entirety of this evening's auction proceeds as a gesture of farewell," he announced. "Farewell." The host repeated the word, a question mark in his voice. Jean-Luc turned to Amelie, a slight nod. She stepped forward, her voice calm and resolute. "This will be our final attendance." Her gaze swept across the sea of faces that had sought to diminish her. She saw only frozen masks, the weight of their own arrogance pressing down upon them, but Jean-Luc offered his arm. Amelie took it, and they walked down the center of the ballroom, not merely exiting the gala, but stepping out of their narrative. Let them whisper later, let them delete the images, let them spin their tales. The only story that mattered now was the one where the woman they scorned left adorned with a treasure they could never truly grasp. They didn't hurry. Jean-Luc held the heavy oak door as they stepped out of the chateau, the stunned silence of the ballroom trailing behind them like a lingering scent. The sapphire Riviere rested lightly against Amelie's skin, a quiet presence. Much like her own, outside, the night air felt crisp and clear. Their driver stood beside the waiting car, his expression knowing. No words were exchanged as he opened the door. Amelie slid into the back seat, the weight of their judgment receding behind her. Jean-Luc followed, his hand still warm from hers. The door closed, and just like that, they were gone. N01 pursued them. No one called their names. They couldn't, for you cannot summon what you have failed to truly see. They had seen a shadow, an enigma, a placeholder. Now, they would see Amelie's presence in every lost donation, every vanished sponsorship, every title page bearing the name de Montaigne. Jean-Luc settled back in his seat, turning to Amelie with a slow smile. "You were the only true jewel in that entire chateau." Amelie returned his smile, not for validation, but from a quiet inner knowing. She hadn't needed to seize the treasure. She had simply worn it.